For Victims and Villains, my name is Joshua.
I'm Ashley.
And today we are talking about
Disney-Pixar's Hoppers.
Hoppers tells the story of a young girl who, in order to save a natural habitat, transforms into a beaver. You heard that right.
General thoughts on this? Fun, great for the family, full of twists and turns and lots of surprises. Just like in the trailer, they are literally putting this into this and gives very Avatar vibes, but same kind of Easter eggs you would find in a classic Disney movie. Lots and lots of Easter eggs, but also more similar to the style of like Miyazaki or Studio Ghibli.
Yeah, I agree. I think general thoughts in this movie made me laugh way more, I think, than most Pixar films that I've seen in like the last few years. Also, it's very heartfelt. There were several times that I was like legitimately crying during this. Not gonna try and hide the fact of it, but it also does kind of pull back on some familiarity. I know you kind of, I don't know if you felt this way, but there are points of it that definitely feel like Avatar, as we talked about.
Yes.
But there are also points of it for me, I think, that also reminded me a little bit of Turning Red from a few years ago. And one of the characters in this movie definitely gives off some like pre-twist Lotso from Toy Story 3.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I agree with you for Turning Red. That same kind of dynamic in a way, but I also love that it gave me the story overall. Gave me Big Hero 6 vibes. If you love the lizard meme, you will love this movie.
I think the art style in this movie is what we've come to expect now from Pixar. There were some moments in this movie that I thought were really visually beautiful. I think kind of getting to meet the other, what we'll call royalty of the animal kingdom, was a really beautiful sequence. Definitely some of the climax in this movie is beautifully done. It's beautifully animated. There's nothing really, I think, that stood out to me about the animation style to this, other than that, because this feels like a really traditional. Yeah, look, call me crazy. This feels like traditional Pixar to me.
I agree and I disagree with that. Mostly because I don't think all Pixar necessarily has the same style. I'd mentioned Big Hero 6 earlier with certain things, but also animation-wise, like technology-wise, definitely Big Hero 6 level. Animation, it takes me back to Brave and hearing those animators talk about like the single strands. What do you mean the single strands of like hair for Merida, or like the strands of yarn woven into the tapestry? When you look at it like piece by piece, frame by frame, the main character Mabel, their hair, all of the animals in the animal kingdom, the feathers, the fur, the texture, to have that be a digital animation, but it looks so clean and so realistic. I think it like is the new age of Pixar, and they're leveling up again.
Look, once you enter into Spider-Verse or Mutant Mayhem, animation standards change. I think the comedy in this really hits really hard. There was I don't remember the last time there are certain sequences that really made me laugh so hard that I was in tears several times. But I think the emotions in this movie really hit hard. I mentioned Turning Red earlier. Turning Red hit me on a really deeply emotional level when that came out. And I think this also hits on those same types of emotions that Turning Red or like Toy Story 2 hits, or even the beginning to Up, the infamous beginning to Up.
Well, that's how you get your classic Pixar then, is the roller coaster of emotions. And it does do a very good job of that. I cried more than once. So
yeah,
potentially bring tissues. But I also laughed harder than I've laughed at a kids movie since Despicable Me 4.
This movie is a little bit longer than most traditional Pixar films. The pacing never once drags. It has this like really steady pace to it right out the gate. It was something that I really appreciated too. They establish a really emotional backbone and core to our protagonist really well, and that kind of echoes throughout the course of every decision she makes, and really just kind of the driving force behind this, much like what you would see with Carl and Ellie in Up.
I do agree that the pacing was just incredible. I honestly could have sat there for another 2 hours and watched an additional 2 hours of the story. And I also felt like there were so many things left to explore in the movie as well, and so many things that I still wanted to know so much more about. So I appreciated that, like, I didn't feel like I was sitting there waiting for the movie to end.
This movie had what I will call a legitimate perfect ending, which is something that I feel like can't always say about every film that I see, especially every film we review on here. Finding a film with a really satisfying ending is sometimes a rare thing, but this one had like ended in like the most perfect way, and even the two post-credit scenes we got were really well done. And although they didn't add anything to the story, they were still really satisfying to kind of see.
And in those post-credit scenes, you still feel the same emotions that you were feeling during the movie. So I thought it was really cool because, like you said, it didn't necessarily add any new developments to the story, but it definitely like still left you with a sense of like, oh.
Yeah, the filmmakers did a really good job at hitting the emotions for this one. With that said, I'm ready to run this one through the Rorschach rating. Are you?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and give Hoppers a 4.5 out of 5. This is one of the strongest Pixar movies in recent memory. This movie is heartfelt. It hits the emotions just right. It's hilarious, but also at the same time, it just is such a wild and weird movie that it had me.
For me, it's only going to be a 4 out of 5. I wanted more. That's the problem. I wanted more. Maybe it's the Disney adult in me. I don't know, but if you are a true Pixar fan or a true Disney adult, you always look for the hidden little things, right? And because of two scenes at two different points of this movie, it leaves me wanting more, and it leaves me wanting to know how they're tying it in to the main Pixar timeline.
Hoppers opens from Disney and Pixar on March 6th. We'll provide links in the show notes below where you guys can check your local listings. But let's talk about mental health, shall we? If you guys are new to our content, Mental Health Moment is where we take a theme of the movie which we're reviewing, talk about it for a few moments in the hopes to deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health.
The key mental health aspect that I focused on for this movie was mental health and technology. The whole title behind the movie, this concept of putting this into this into this, like the trailer says. Very Avatar moment. And fun fact, there's a lovely little joke, see if you can catch it, in the movie about Avatar. But the whole concept of hopping from from brain consciousness to the consciousness of an animal, so to speak, without giving too much away, we think about that as like the effects of the mental health when you're coming out of that consciousness as well. And applying it to today, I look at it as what a lot of people call doom scrolling. And there's some very big themes that Joshua will talk about.
So one of the biggest themes I think this film addresses, not just in our protagonists, but also throughout the course of this film as you kind of meet other characters, is grief, and mostly how this film demonstrates that grief isn't this linear experience. It's not this one size fits all type of experience. That's one of the things that we've talked about over the years, whether it's been podcasting or simple reviews like this, is that grief is something that is going to manifest itself in a multiple different ways, and even sometimes languages or activities, as Ashley will talk about.
Josh talked about different ways that grief manifests in our characters, and we also get to see a little bit of how each of our characters deal with grief. Mabel kind of latches on to the technology behind hopping and this idea that I think a lot of us can relate to of escapism and the mental health benefits to having a little bit of an escapism fantasy like dream that I would say Mabel is feeling during this movie. And that is kind of the way that she manages her specific grief. And I know for me, I use, cosplay as my escapism to help my mental health, as, it's just a different form of art.
I think one of the things for me in that relationship between grief and escapism, it was film that actually became that for me to begin with. When people asked how I got to become either a cinephile or a movie buff, largely because when my grandmother got sick as a young kid, I was very close with her, and to escape it, that was where movies came in. And anytime that I've ever had hard times in my life, or I've had seasons of depression, or I've been really anxious, it's always been turning towards film. It's always been talking about film, but it's always been the kind of that backbone of like, this is a part of who I am. I think sometimes escapism gets a bad rap in terms of being really toxic for your mental health. And I think that while I do agree with that statement, I think ultimately it can also have a positive effect. It's just about balance, and it's about knowing your limit.
And fantasy and reality, and knowing when it is okay to have a little whimsy, have a little fantasy, but when you need to kind of gear up and get back into reality.
I totally agree. So if you're someone you know is currently struggling with anything we've talked about in this video, there would be mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, suicidation, anything along those lines, click the links in our show notes below to check out our mental health resource library. One more time, Hoppers opens up in theaters March 6th from Disney and Pixar. Again, in the show notes, you guys will find links to our mental health resource library, more social media, more movie reviews like this, links to our podcast network, and that subscribe button. So until next time, remember to keep it classy.